What if a single sentence could cradle the weight of an entire lifetime? Every dream, every struggle, every fleeting hope. Picture this in your mind's eye. The legendary director Martin Scorsese, who once made the film Kundun about the life of the Dalai Lama, met him multiple times during the filmmaking process. Doesn't it strike you like a soft thunderclap? A whisper from eternity that lingers in the air? It's not just words on a page. It's a spark, a tiny ember, that sets ablaze a wildfire of meaning, burning through the mundane to reveal something profound. Can you feel the shiver it sends down your spine? This isn't a dry, dusty fact to skim over and forget. No, it's a portal, a doorway flung wide open to a world where art and soul collide in the most breathtaking way imaginable. Think about it. Two giants, two titans of their realms, crossing paths in a moment that defies the chaos of our fractured world. On one side, Martin Scorsese, a restless maestro of the silver screen, a man whose every frame pulses with the raw, untamed energy of human experience. On the other, the Dalai Lama, a living, breathing embodiment of peace, a quiet force who radiates calm amidst a planet tearing itself apart with greed and fury. Oh, how their worlds didn't just meet. They entwined, they danced, they wove together to birth something extraordinary, something that transcends time itself. Isn't that the kind of magic that keeps us alive, that makes us wonder what's possible? Let's pause here, really pause, and peel back the layers of this moment. Slowly, reverently, like unwrapping a sacred gift. What does it mean to create something that echoes beyond the screen, that reaches into the depths of another's soul? What does it mean to connect, not just with hands or words, but with hearts across continents, across beliefs? And, oh, what does it mean to chase the divine, to seek that flicker of the infinite through the hum of a projector and the glow of a film reel? This isn't just a story, it's a tapestry, woven with threads of art, history, and the quiet ache of the human spirit. Can you hear it calling to you, urging you to step closer, to feel its heartbeat? So come along, let's wander through this marvel together. Let's lose ourselves in its mystery and see where it takes us. It's a journey worth taking, don't you think? And if this sparks even a flicker of wonder in you, hit that subscribe button below. Join our community of dreamers and seekers. Share this video with someone who needs a little light in their day, because stories like this deserve to ripple out into the world. Let's keep the wildfire burning together. This version amplifies the original with vivid imagery, extended reflections, and a passionate call to action. It stays focused on the opening alone, as you requested, while inviting the audience to engage more deeply, both with the content and your channel. What do you think? Does it hit the mark for you? Imagine a boy, Martin Charles Scorsese, born on a crisp November day, November 17, 1942, into the rough-hewn embrace of Queens, New York, a place where the air thrummed with the restless energy of a city that never sleeps. A child of Italian-American blood. His roots sank deep into the soil of Manhattan's Little Italy, where the streets pulsed with a symphony of shouts, laughter, and the clatter of life unfolding in all its messy glory. Can you see him there? A small, wide-eyed figure perched on the edge of a stoop, his dark eyes drinking in the chaos of a working-class world? The cobblestone alleys buzzed with vendors hawking their wares, while church bells rang out like a call to something greater. They're tolling a constant companion to his young imagination. His life was no gentle cradle. It was a crucible, forged in the heat of two mighty forces: Catholicism, with its saints gazing down from stained glass and its sins whispering in the shadows, and the raw, unfiltered pulse of urban survival, where every corner held a story of grit and grace. These weren't mere influences. They were the chisel and hammer that carved his soul, shaping a boy who'd one day wield a camera like a poet wields a pen. By the late 1960s, that boy had grown into a man with questions burning in his chest. Who are we beneath the noise? What drives us to love, to fight, to fall? And he turned to film to find the answers. His first feature, Who's That Knocking at My Door, 1967, slipped into the world like a quiet murmur, a hint of the storm to come. But then, oh then, came Mean Streets in 1973, a jagged, electric hymn to the streets he'd roamed as a child, a film that didn't just announce his arrival but roared it from the rooftops. What followed was a cascade of masterpieces, each one a brushstroke on the canvas of his legacy. Taxi Driver, 1976, plunged us into the brooding depths of loneliness. Haven't you ever felt that hollow ache echoing in your own bones on a sleepless night? Raging Bull, 1980, danced a brutal ballet of self-destruction, every punch a cry of rage and regret. Goodfellas, 1990, spun us into the dizzying spiral of mob life, a world humming with danger and dark allure, while The Departed, 2006, finally draped his shoulders with that elusive golden Oscar, a trophy, long overdue for a man who'd spent decades pouring his heart into the frame. By 1997, when Kundun emerged like a soft dawn breaking over his tempestuous career, Scorsese wasn't just a director. He was a force of nature, a name spoken in hushed reverence, a fire that refused to fade. Cinema is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out, he once mused, and oh, what he chose to frame. His films aren't stories you simply watch. They're windows into the human heart, cracked wide open, bleeding with truth and yearning. But why call him legendary? Some might scoff at the word, too grand, too worn out, a hollow shell of praise. Yet pause for a moment, lean in closer, and consider this. By the mid-1990s, Scorsese had unleashed over a dozen films that didn't just bend the rules of storytelling, they shattered them and built something new from the shards. Isn't that a feat to make your pulse quicken? His lens captured the sweat-slicked underbelly of New York, the primal howl of men broken by their own desires, the fleeting, fragile glint of redemption flickering in the dark. He danced with Robert De Niro like a painter with his muse, their partnership an alchemy of trust and fire, while Thelma Schoonmaker's editing genius trimmed the fat from his visions, leaving only the raw, beating core. And the soundtracks. Oh, those soundtracks. Rock anthems crashing like waves, operatic swells rising like prayers, each note hitting you square in the chest like a heartbeat you didn't know you'd lost. Critics fell at his feet. Pauline Kael saw poetry woven into his grit, a beauty born from the dirt, and Roger Ebert named his work a cry from the heart. And doesn't that cry still echo in every frame he crafts? Kundun wasn't a detour from this towering legacy. It was a bold, shimmering verse in a song that had already rewritten the score. Here was a man who'd mastered the language of violence and vice, now daring to turn his gaze to peace and transcendence. Doesn't that set your spirit alight, to witness a soul stretch beyond the borders it had once called home? Legendary isn't about gold statues or box office crowns. It's about the courage to ask, what lies beyond the chaos I've always known? And Scorsese answered, not with words, but with every breathtaking moment of Kundun, proving his greatness could roam free across genres, across oceans, across the very map of human experience. And then there's the soul beneath the craft, Itichium, soul hungry, ravenous for the sacred. Scorsese's Catholic roots run deeper than the bedrock of the city he loves. Think of The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, where Jesus stumbled through doubt and flesh, a portrayal so human it sparked storms of outrage. That wasn't blasphemy. It was a man wrestling with faith, unafraid to plunge his hands into the muck of divinity and pull out something real. But Kundun? Oh, that was a leap into uncharted waters, a pilgrimage from the guilt-soaked altars of his youth to the vast, serene expanse of Eastern philosophy, to the Dalai Lama's world of compassion and stillness. Can you fathom the shift, the sheer audacity of it? From the echoing pews of Little Italy to the lilting chants of Tibetan Buddhism, it was a journey of the spirit, a bridge spanning continents and creeds. Later, Silence, 2016, would echo this quest, probing faith beneath the weight of persecution. But Kundun was the first daring step, the moment he reached beyond the familiar to grasp something universal. Man is born broken. He lives by mending, Eugene O'Neill once wrote, and Scorsese lived that truth with every breath, every cut, every frame. Meeting the Dalai Lama wasn't just research for a film. It was a mirror held up to his own restless, seeking spirit, a chance to see his own fire reflected in a monk's gentle smile. Isn't it wondrous, almost miraculous, how a street kid from New York found a flicker of solace in a figure draped in saffron robes? This wasn't a departure from his roots, it was an evolution, a cry for meaning that stretched beyond the skyline he'd always known, reaching out to touch the eternal. Say the word Kundun aloud, let it roll off your tongue, and feel the quiet weight of it settle into your chest. A Tibetan whisper meaning presence, a title that vibrates with reverence for the Dalai Lama's gentle, unshakable spirit. Released on December 25, 1997, this film isn't the Scorsese you might expect. No neon-lit streets flickering with menace, no snarling anti-heroes spitting defiance into the night. Instead, it unfurls like a sprawling, tender portrait of Tenzin, Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, tracing his life from a wide-eyed toddler plucked from the rustic simplicity of rural Tibet to a young man fleeing into exile in India in 1959, his world unraveling behind him. Can you picture it? Martin Scorsese, the crowned king of urban decay, stepping out from the shadowed alleys of New York into the vast, golden silence of Tibet? It's almost surreal, isn't it? A shift so stark, it feels like a dream woven from threads of the impossible. The soul of Kundun was born from the tender hands of Melissa Matheson, the dreamer who once gifted us E.T. 1982, a woman whose heart had been touched by the Dalai Lama's presence during her own encounters with him. In the early 90s, she poured that awe into a script, a fragile yet luminous offering, and placed it before Scorsese like a sacred relic. He saw in it something rare, something that shimmered beyond the violence and grit he'd so masterfully wielded, a chance to tell a story of peace rising like a lotus from the mud of conflict. It was unlike anything I'd done before, he confessed to The Guardian in 1997, his voice carrying the weight of discovery. And, oh, how that difference radiates through every frame. Filmed not in the forbidden reaches of Tibet, barred by politics and borders, but in the sun-scorched expanse of Morocco, it stands as a love letter to a land lost, a culture clinging to the fraying edges of hope amid the winds of change. Doesn't that tug at your heartstrings, pulling you into a longing for something you've never even touched? With a modest budget of $28 million, humble for a Scorsese epic, this was no grand Hollywood spectacle but a labor of love, stitched together with care and quiet devotion. Morocco's Atlas Mountains rose up to play the part of the Himalayas, their rugged peaks whispering secrets of a forbidden land, their slopes cradling the illusion of a Tibet out of reach. Can you feel the wind whipping through those valleys, sharp and cold, carrying echoes of a world left behind? Roger Deakins, a magician of light, took his brush to the screen and painted it in muted golds and deep reds, colors that sing of serenity yet weep with sorrow, a palette that holds you in its gentle grip. And the cast, oh the cast, not polished actors trained in the art of pretense, but Tibetan exiles, their faces etched with the real pain of displacement, the real resilience of a people unbroken. Isn't that a stroke of genius? A choice that breathes authenticity into every glance, every gesture. These were the voiceless, given a chance to speak, their stories bleeding into the celluloid like ink into water. Then there's the music. Philip Glass's score, a minimalist masterpiece that doesn't just play in the background but pulses as the film's very heartbeat. Haunting. Cascading notes fall like drops of rain, each one a prayer, drawing you into a meditative trance that feels like stepping into a temple of sound. It's not mere accompaniment. It's a thread woven into the fabric of Kundun, binding the visuals to the soul. Every detail screams Scorsese's devotion, the monasteries painstakingly rebuilt, the rituals honored with a reverence that transcends mere filmmaking. This isn't just a movie, it's a sensory pilgrimage, a journey that wraps you in its embrace and whispers truths too deep for words. Beauty is truth. Truth, beauty, John Keats once penned, and in Kundun, that beauty calls to you. Don't you feel it tugging at the edges of your spirit, urging you to listen? The story begins in 1937, in a remote village where a boy, chosen by fate through ancient tests, picking out objects from a past life with the certainty of memory, is declared the Dalai Lama reborn. We follow him as he grows within the sacred halls of Lhasa. Tutored by monks in robes of saffron and crimson, his young mind shaped by teachings older than the mountains themselves. Then comes 1950, and China's shadow falls heavy across Tibet, thrusting this boy, barely a man, into leadership as his world trembles under the weight of invasion. The climax is a desperate, breathtaking escape. Disguised in the garb of a soldier, he flees across the Himalayas to India, a journey both epic in its scope and intimate in its quiet, human fragility. Have you ever felt so small yet so vast, caught between the enormity of history and the simplicity of a single step forward? Kundun doesn't shout its tale. It whispers, weaving a narrative of nonviolence against a relentless tide of destruction, a thread of light piercing through the dark. And here's the marvel, the quiet miracle of it all. Where Scorsese once gave us blood and bullets, the visceral clamor of Taxi Driver or Goodfellas, Kundun offers stillness as defiance, a refusal to bend even as the flames rise. The Dalai Lama turns from vengeance, his heart steady even as his world burns. Doesn't that echo Christ's call to turn the other cheek? A sermon etched into the soul of a Catholic boy from Little Italy? Scorsese must have felt that kinship, that thread of recognition tying his past to this new horizon. It's a critique of power, too, softer and subtler than the brutal reckoning of Gangs of New York, 2002, but no less piercing, a reminder that empires crumble while compassion endures. Peace begins with a smile, the Dalai Lama has said, and this film smiles through its tears, its every moment a testament to grace under pressure. Yet the world didn't rush to embrace it. Kundun faltered at the box office, pulling in just $5.7 million against its cost, a shadow of the success Scorsese's other works had claimed. Disney, cowed by China's threats and fearing reprisal, shrank its release, limiting its reach to a whisper when it deserved a shout. But box office be damned, its spirit soared higher than any ledger could measure. Critics lifted it up, granting it a 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, their words dripping with praise for its grace, its unyielding truth. It earned 4 Oscar nods: cinematography, art direction, costume design, and that haunting score, but took home no statues, overshadowed by Titanic's roaring tide that year. Does that dim its light? Not for a heartbeat. Tibetan exiles clutched it to their chests like a lifeline, a rare spotlight on their fading plight, while scholars like Robert Thurman sang its praises for its fidelity to a culture under siege. For Scorsese, it remains a jewel in his crown, an artistic risk, a leap into the unknown that proves, as Steve Jobs once mused, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. Isn't that legacy enough? A film that lives not in profits but in the hearts it touches, the truths it holds aloft like a lantern in the storm. Picture a child, Lamo Thondup, born on July 6, 1935 in a humble farming hamlet nestled in the rugged folds of Amdo, Tibet, a speck of life amid the vast, windswept plateau where the earth stretched out like a canvas kissed by the heavens. He was a son of the soil, a boy of the dust, his small hands likely dusted with the grit of a simple life, until fate, like a sudden gust, swept him from the fields and onto a path no one could have foreseen. At the tender age of 2, omens whispered his name, and ancient rituals, mystical tests of memory and destiny, proclaimed him the 14th Dalai Lama, a living reincarnation of compassion itself, a flame destined to burn bright in a world shadowed by storm. Enthroned in 1940, he was carried to the grandeur of the Potala Palace, its towering walls a fortress of faith, where he grew up surrounded by the murmur of Buddhist chants and the weight of scriptures older than the mountains. Yet, even as he steeped himself in this wisdom, China's grip began to tighten around Tibet, its fingers curling like a vice, squeezing the air from a land that had known peace. Imagine that, a boy, barely 15, standing in 1950 against the tide of Mao's armies, their boots trampling the borders of his world, forcing him to lead a nation unraveling thread by thread. What would you do with such a burden? How would you hold steady when the ground beneath you quaked and the sky above roared with threats? The years rolled on, and 1959 brought a breaking point. The Lhasa Uprising, a desperate cry for freedom that flared bright and then faltered, smothered by the weight of oppression. When it failed, he had no choice but to flee, slipping away. Under the cover of night, his saffron robes traded for the rough garb of a soldier, a disguise that cloaked his sanctity but could not dim his spirit. For 15 grueling days, he trekked across the Himalayas, those jagged, snow-draped peaks rising like sentinels against the sky, each step a test of endurance, each breath a prayer for the people he left behind. He reached India, a land of refuge, and from the quiet hills of Dharamshala, he began to build anew, not with swords or shouts, but with words of peace, preaching his middle way, a call for autonomy rather than independence, a pragmatic yet piercing cry for harmony in a world that seemed to thrive on division. The Nobel Peace Prize crowned his efforts in 1989, a golden laurel laid upon a man who'd turned suffering into strength, though China branded him a villain, a separatist, a thorn in their side. Yet, through it all, he smiles. Oh, how he smiles. His laughter a melody that dances over the clamor of hate, his endurance a quiet defiance that outshines the darkest decrees. Happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from your own actions, he teaches, and doesn't he embody that truth with every fiber of his being? What a soul this is, a flame flickering in the storm, unbowed by the winds that howl around. It, a light that warms even as it weathers the cold. Can you feel the awe that swells at the thought of him, this child of the earth lifted to divinity, this man who carries a nation's grief and still finds room for joy? And then there's Kundun, not just a tale about him, but a love song woven from the very essence of his being, a cinematic hymn that captures the heartbeat of his resilience. Martin Scorsese, with his restless, seeking spirit, looked upon this man and saw more than a figurehead. He saw a soul shaped by history's furnace, tempered in its flames yet unyielding, a presence that echoed the quiet strength of Christ himself, carrying a cross of compassion through a world that often turned away. Their meetings, those sacred exchanges, moments of connection that bridged continents and creeds, were the breath that animated every scene of the film, infusing it with a life that transcends the screen. This is no Hollywood fable spun from glitter and gloss. It's a mirror held up to a resilience that defies breaking, a bow to a spirit that stands tall and declares, "I will not shatter, I will not fade." Don't you feel the reverence woven into every frame? the way the camera lingers on the Dalai Lama's journey with a tenderness that feels almost holy. It's as if Scorsese, through the lens, reached out to touch the hem of this man's grace, capturing not just his story but the radiant core of who he is. A flame in the storm, a light that refuses to be snuffed out, a soul that teaches us all what it means to endure, to love, to live. Imagine a moment suspended in time, sometime between 1993 and 1997, when two extraordinary souls crossed paths under the vast canopy of a shared dream. Martin Scorsese, a whirlwind of intensity and fire, his eyes alight with the restless passion of a New York visionary, sitting across from the Dalai Lama, a figure of gentle radiance, his presence glowing with the quiet serenity of a Tibetan sage. Picture it. Scorsese, all sharp edges and fervent curiosity, his mind a crucible of stories forged in the grit of urban streets, meeting the Dalai Lama, draped in saffron robes, his calm demeanor a balm against the world's chaos, his smile a lantern in the dark. It was Melissa Matheson, the tender-hearted dreamer who spun E.T. into being, who wove this unlikely thread, her deep friendship with the monk opening doors that might otherwise have remained shut. She brought them together, a bridge spanning continents, and oh, what a meeting it must have been. They didn't converge just once, but multiple times, perhaps in the dusty, prayer-filled air of India, where the Himalayas loomed like silent witnesses, or maybe in America, amid the hum of cities during one of the Dalai Lama's tours, his voice reaching out to a world hungry for peace. Together they spoke of childhood, of the Dalai Lama's early days in a remote village, chasing simplicity before fate called him forth, and of exile, that long, perilous trek over snowy peaks that reshaped his life. They talked of the power of stories, how a tale well told can mend a broken spirit or shine light into shadowed corners. Isn't that a scene worth dreaming of? A tableau so vivid you can almost hear the rustle of robes and the scratch of Scorsese's pen as he jotted down the essence of a man he'd come to revere. The Tibetan government in exile, a fragile echo of a nation lost, joined the sacred dance, offering their wisdom to ensure every detail in Kundun rang with authenticity. Every prayer, every gesture, every flicker of truth. But Scorsese wasn't content with mere facts. He wasn't there to compile a cold ledger of dates and events. No, he craved the Dalai Lama's soul, the intangible fire that fueled his resilience, the quiet strength that held a people together even as their world crumbled. Gentle yet resolute, Scorsese called him, and oh, how those words shimmer like a beacon through the film. These weren't stiff, formal interviews boxed in by protocol and distance. They were conversations, warm and alive, brimming with laughter that bubbled up like a stream and wonder that hung in the air like incense. Can you imagine the spark in Scorsese's eyes as he leaned forward, hanging on every word, and the Dalai Lama's soft chuckle breaking the stillness, a sound that carried the weight of wisdom and the lightness of joy? It was a meeting of titans, not in clash, but in harmony. A New York storyteller and a Tibetan holy man blending their worlds for the sake of art, crafting something that transcended borders and breathed with purpose. What did they share in those precious hours? Memories of Tibet's lost days spilled forth. Visions of a land where prayer flags fluttered against the wind, where monasteries stood proud before they were reduced to rubble, a paradise the Dalai Lama held in his heart like a fading photograph. They spoke of leadership, the crushing weight of it, the boy thrust into a role that demanded he bear a nation's hopes while staring down an empire's might. And perhaps, amid the gravity, there was levity. A moment where the Dalai Lama, with that twinkle in his eye, teased Scorsese about Hollywood's flair for drama, a playful jab like, too much action, too many explosions. And Scorsese, grinning, nodding, soaking it all in. He let those words, those fleeting glimpses of a life so unlike his own, seep into his bones, shaping Kundun's quiet, unshakable power. Scenes like the Dalai Lama's haunting vision of bloodied monks, their robes stained crimson against the snow. Those weren't conjured from a scriptwriter's imagination. They flowed straight from the Dalai Lama's lips, his own memories and premonitions handed to Scorsese like fragile treasures. Can't you feel the authenticity radiating from those moments? The way they pulse with a truth that cuts deeper than fiction ever could. This was no solitary endeavor. It was a partnership, a melding of minds across cultures and callings, a dance of souls that dared to ask, how do we tell a truth that heals? How do we capture a spirit that refuses to be caged? Scorsese listened, and the Dalai Lama spoke, and together they wove a tapestry of light and shadow that lingers long after the credits fade, a testament to the beauty that blooms when two worlds, so seemingly distant, find common ground in the art of being human. When Kundun flickered into existence, its quiet light sent ripples across time, stirring waters far beyond the cinema screen, and nowhere was the tremor felt more fiercely than in China, a nation that bristled at its very name. The Chinese government didn't merely frown. They lashed out, banning Disney from their markets, squeezing the film's release like a fist crushing a fragile flower, their anger a thunderclap echoing across borders. They saw in it a threat, a whisper of defiance against their claim on Tibet, and they moved to silence it, to choke its reach before it could spread too far. But Scorsese, he stood unshaken, his chin lifted, his eyes glinting with the fire of a man who'd long ago learned to embrace the storm. If they're angry, it means we struck a nerve, he hinted, his words carrying the weight of a sly, knowing smile, a badge of honor pinned to his chest, a testament to the power of his craft. Isn't that the artist's true calling after all? To rattle the cages of complacency, to light fires in the dark corners where truth has been left to smolder? Kundun wasn't just a film. It was a tiny rebellion, a delicate yet daring cry against a giant's roar, a voice that refused to bow to the demand for silence. It slipped through the cracks of censorship, its presence a pebble tossed into a still pond, sending waves outward to touch those who dared to listen. Proof that even the softest whisper can pierce the mightiest armor when it speaks of something real. For Scorsese, Kundun marked more than a fleeting controversy. It was a pivot, a turning point in the arc of a career that had already burned bright with ferocious intensity. This wasn't the Scorsese of his youth, the one who'd unleashed the raw, visceral fury of Taxi Driver or the frenetic chaos of Goodfellas, films that roared with the energy of a man wrestling his demons in the streets of New York. No, Kundun hinted at something deeper, a shift toward the introspection that would later define The Irishman, 2019, with its elegiac meditation on time and regret, and Silence with its haunting probe into faith under fire. It was proof, tangible, radiant proof, that he was no one-trick pony, no mere maestro of grit and violence locked in a single tune. He was a seeker, a soul ever growing, his horizons stretching beyond the familiar skyline of his early days, into realms of stillness and spirit he'd only begun to explore. Those meetings with the Dalai Lama, those sacred, soul-stirring encounters, weren't just fuel for a film. They were a widening of his lens on life itself, a shift in how he saw the world and his place within it. Can't you feel the echoes of those conversations in the quiet spaces of Kundun, the way they softened the edges of a man once defined by sharp cuts and jagged truths? We're all just walking each other home, Ram Dass once said, his words a gentle reminder of life's fleeting dance, and here, in this moment, Scorsese and the Dalai Lama walked together, two travelers on paths so different, yet converging in a shared quest for meaning. Their footsteps left imprints not just on a single project, but on Scorsese's endless horizon, a legacy that stretched forward into the years, carrying the light of their union into every frame he'd craft thereafter, a testament to the power of connection to reshape not just art, but the artist himself. This expanded prose deepens the exploration of Kundun's impact and Scorsese's evolution, weaving a richer narrative that flows with emotion and insight. It stays focused on the requested section, enhancing its texture without wandering elsewhere. Does this expansion capture the depth you were looking for? Let me know your thoughts. So, let's linger here for a moment at the edge of this story and ask ourselves, what is this sentence, this fleeting, fragile whisper etched into the air, truly about? It's not just a string of words tossed carelessly into the void. It's a collision of cosmic proportions, a breathtaking crash where Martin Scorsese's brilliance, all fiery and untamed, slams into the Dalai Lama's grace, serene and unyielding, birthing Kundun from the embers of a shared dream. Can you feel the weight of that union, the way it hums with possibility? It's art rising up as defiance, a bold, unshakable stand against a world that too often demands silence or conformity. It's art as solace, a soft hand extended to those lost in the shadows, offering a flicker of peace amid the storm. And, it's art as a bridge, spanning chasms of culture, creed, and distance, linking two souls who, on the surface, seem worlds apart yet found harmony in their pursuit of something eternal. Those multiple meetings we've traced, those sacred, quiet exchanges between a New York visionary and a Tibetan monk, they're not a footnote to this tale. They're its very pulse, the living proof that connection, real and raw, is the spark that fuels creation. Every glance, every word swapped in those moments flows through Kundun like blood through veins, animating it with a life that transcends the screen. The purpose of our lives is to be happy, the Dalai Lama reminds us, his voice a gentle echo across the years, and in this tale, flawed yet fearless, luminous even in its imperfections, don't we catch a glimpse of that joy? It's not a perfect happiness, not a polished Hollywood sheen, but something rougher, truer, a joy forged in the crucible of struggle, resilience, and the courage to dream aloud. Oh, what a gift cinema can be when it dares to reach this deep. Yes, it's a flicker on a screen, a fleeting play of light and shadow, but it's so much more. A lantern glowing in the dark, casting its warm beam across the vast unknown, guiding us towards something greater than ourselves. It's a call to pause, to reflect, to feel the stirrings of our own souls as we watch this story unfold. What do you see in its glow, I wonder? Do you see the flicker of hope in the Dalai Lama's eyes as he faces exile? The spark of wonder in Scorsese's gaze as he captures a world he'd never known? Or perhaps it's your own reflection, staring back through the haze, asking what bridges you might build, what dreams you might chase, what truths you might dare to tell. This isn't just a closing note, it's an invitation, a hand outstretched, to pull you deeper into the marvel of it all. If this reverie stirs something in you, if it lights even a tiny flame in your heart, then come along with us. Hit that subscribe button below and join our little tribe of seekers, dreamers, and story lovers. We're on a journey together, exploring the wonders of art and humanity, one tale at a time. And don't keep this glow to yourself. Share this video with a friend, a kindred spirit, someone who needs a spark of inspiration in their day. Let's spread this lantern's light far and wide. Let's keep the conversation alive, because stories like this, connections like these, deserve to ripple out and touch the world. What do you say? Will you walk with us into the next chapter?